All right, so the next essay type we're going to talk about is one that's pretty common across just about all writing or English classes, and it's called a narrative essay. A lot of times, this will be one of the very first essays that you write, not because it's, I don't want to say easier, but it's a style that more students are going to be familiar with or comfortable with when you're first introducing them to college writing. So there are a couple things to keep in mind when you're crafting a narrative essay. And narrative by this just means you're telling some sort of a story that has a purpose. You want to make sure you go in order or put it in chronological order, same way you would if you were writing, say, a history paper or something like that. This is one of the few times in academic writing where first person, using me, I, we, our, are acceptable. Generally, you want to try and eliminate that in most college writing. For example, today I am going to tell you about blank, or today in this essay I am writing about blank. Like, it's not that it's necessarily like wrong to the point where you're going to fail, but it's a little bit cliche, and it's a little bit over explainy, for lack of a better term. You don't need to, especially because generally speaking your audience is either going to be the other people in your class, your fellow students, or it's going to be your teacher, instructor, professor, whichever. So they're already aware of what the assignment is. So there's no need to restate it by saying, today I am going to tell you a story about the time I first got my license. Like, you can be a little bit more creative than that. However, you do want to be specific. Try and avoid unnecessary, vague kind of words like maybe, or describing something as a thing or a person. Or don't just say, when I got my license, I had saved up enough money to get a car. Tell us what kind of car it was. Tell us what color it was, what year it was, what did it have on the inside. I can remember with my first car, and this is going way back longer than I would like to think about. I had a 1997 Honda Accord, and this was in 2002, 2003, and it did not have a CD player or a radio. It had Lord knows most of you probably aren't even going to know what this is. It had a cassette deck. So if you've ever been wandering through a Goodwill, or if you've been wandering through a flea market and you've seen those little 2-inch by 3.5-inch little boxes that have a weird plastic thing inside, that's a cassette tape. And that's what we used to listen to music on if you were too poor to buy CDs back in the 90s. So you want to be detailed, specific, and be a little creative. Think about an interesting way you could tell the story. I've had students that have told the story or the narrative from the perspective of, like I said, if I was talking about my first car, I've had students write, for example, like from the perspective of the car, not from themselves getting the car, but rather from the car and its thoughts on you driving it, for example. So, you don't want to be too creative, but think about a way that you could tell a story that isn't going to be like everyone else's. So when we take a look at an outline for this, you want to, in your introduction, explain what you're going to be telling. What is this story, this narrative about? Is it about the first time you got something? Is it about somebody that is extremely important to your life? Is it somebody that taught you something? Is it the worst day of your life, the best day of your life? Could be almost anything, but you want to mention, at least in passing without giving too much away, what the story is that your readers should expect. So then your paragraph should be broken up in order. Explain in your first body paragraph what happened from the beginning of the story. And then somewhere around the middle, you want to talk about what the big moment in this was. What was the climax of the story, for lack of a better term? You know, when did the action happen? When did it get interesting? Then talk about what happened after. So after you get to the important thing, don't just immediately end it and go to the conclusion. You need to reflect, as we talked about in the reflection essay, what did this mean in a larger sense? And then finally, in your conclusion, explain again what you told us and why it was important that you told us. So I put a few examples in here that could possibly be prompts that you might get. Something like, explain a time of growth in your life and what forms that took. Maybe you had to overcome an obstacle. Maybe you had a really great teacher. Maybe you had to deal with the passing of a loved one. You know, it could be many, many, many things in terms of how did you grow as a person. And then the second one, tell me about someone in your life that taught you something important and how they did it. Or another one that I've used in the past is, tell me about the most influential person in your life. So like for number one, explain a time of growth. The go-to example that I usually use for myself is when I was in middle school, or a lot of people call it junior high, I think, down here. But when I was in junior high, the first year I was eligible to try out for the school basketball team, I made the team. And then I really coasted a little bit and didn't work out as hard as I should have, didn't practice as much as I should have. I just figured, I'm already on the team, you know, I've already done the hard part, I can just coast from that point. And the next year, when we had to go through tryouts again, I didn't make the team. And I had to watch all my friends still make the team and play and go to the games and everything like that. And I didn't get to suit up with them. Not that I played very much, I wasn't that good, but you know, you get the point. You know what it's like when you have the ability to do something with your friends and then you don't do the right thing and that gets taken away from you. For the second one, tell me about someone in your life that taught you something important and how they did it. I could go with a number of people here, but I'll choose my old boss at the last university I was teaching at. She helped both my wife and I really develop kind of the attitudes that we present when we're teaching now, albeit very differently. Anybody that has either had us both or has observed us knows that my wife is the tough one and I'm a little bit more of a pushover. So anyway, these are examples. Obviously, you can come up with something different, but usually most people that are in charge of a class are going to give you something that's a little bit emotionally charged. That way, it's a little bit easier for you to write about it and to explain it in more detail. That's not to say it'll always be that way, but most of them have something to do with some type of an emotional attachment to something. All right? So those are that's a narrative essay, and I will see you in the next video.